What's going on, everybody? This is Benjamin Bok Choi. Today we're going to be talking about the CSL DD. I just bought a base model 5 Newton meter version and spent about a day or two on it, so these are just my first thoughts. Now, before we begin, I just want to say that I had no issues with the CSL Elite that I had been using. I've owned one since October of 2020, so about 2.5 years, and before that I had a Logitech G29 for maybe about a year as well. So this is my first foray into direct drive wheels. I wasn't looking to switch over, as most people, most of the content creators that I've watched have said that a CSL Elite to a base model CSL DD isn't a day and night upgrade. It's more of a side grade with more detailed force feedback, but I ended up buying the boost kit anyway and staggered the deliveries just so that I could spend a few days with the base model 5 Newton meter version without the temptation of throwing on the boost kit and never having any experience with the base model. So this is just strictly the 5 Newton meter version. If the boost kit comes in and it is a noticeable change, then I will probably make another update video. But little story before this, the only reason why I picked one up was because a buddy of mine was looking to get into sim racing. He went online, bought a used CSL Elite pedal set and CSL Elite wheelbase. I gave him my P1 wheel that came with my bundle a few years back, so he didn't have to pay for that. But a few days after he got the wheelbase, it worked fine, and then one day it just stopped working. He had a malfunction. He sent it back for a refund, and he was a little bit hesitant to buy another used wheelbase online from somebody he didn't know. So the timing was right. I offered him my PlayStation compatible one. He was looking for the PlayStation compatible one. They were a little bit more expensive, like $300 and up online used. So I sold him mine for $250, and I bought a CSL DD. So I only ended up paying like $120, $130 as opposed to the $370 that it would have cost with taxes and shipping. So I did save a little bit of money, and I didn't pay full price for this, which is why I think I have a more positive view on the base model. So before we begin, I just have to talk shit about Fanatec for a little bit. At least Fanatec USA. Why do you continue to use FedEx to deliver your products? For the love of fuck, FedEx is the worst goddamn shipping company in the entire world. Please switch over from FedEx. It was my shipment was supposed to get here on Tuesday morning around 10 a.m. I get a notification saying delivery was attempted. Nobody was home, which is a lie. My wife was home. I was at work. They didn't ring the doorbell or buzz the doorbell, and they didn't even bother calling me. They just either didn't show up or they showed up and didn't attempt to deliver. So I had to put the damn thing on hold and go pick it up myself a day later. I know, hashtag first world problems, but come on, man. I paid almost $400 for everything. I would expect it to show up on time anyway. But with that out of the way, let's get to the actual wheelbase here. So this is my first experience with a direct drive wheel. Like I said, I've only had experience with gear-driven wheels and belt-driven wheels, and the biggest thing that I noticed right away, which I didn't even notice before I used a direct drive wheel, is there is no dead zone in the force feedback when you're making quick directional changes, or if you lose traction with understeer and then you gain traction right away. I didn't even notice it while using the CSL Elite, but now that I'm using a CSL DD, there is no momentary loss of traction, or force feedback, I should say. Say, for instance, a section like Maggots and Beckett's in Silverstone, where you're making quick right, left, right directional movements on the steering wheel. There's like a half second of dead space when you're making those quick directional changes, where you're really unsure if the car has gained traction or not. Whereas with the CSL DD wheelbase, I noticed there was no moments of loss force feedback. You felt traction the entire way through, and in fact, it actually helped me gain like 2/10 on my personal best, and that was just after having the wheelbase for like a day. Obviously, it's only 5 Newton meters, so it's not quite as strong force feedback, but the detail in it is just, I don't know, a lot better than the CSL Elite. Now, I've never used a club sport wheel. A lot of people online do say that it's closer to a direct drive feeling than it is the CSL Elite. I don't really know how true that is. I've never used it, so I can't really speak to that. But at least compared to the CSL Elite, it is much more detailed. So I think once the boost kit comes in, it'll probably be a night and day difference with a little bit more power. I know it's 8 Newton meters compared to the CSL Elite's 7.5, I think it is. I know it's not too much of a difference, but with the detail and a little bit more power in the force feedback, I'm sure it'll be worth the upgrade. Now, if I didn't have somebody to sell my CSL Elite to, I probably wouldn't have made the upgrade, at least to the base model CSL DD, just because now having used it, I don't think there's enough of a difference to justify that price, that $350 premium. Now, obviously, if you're trying to get into like esports or more serious racing, you want that detail, I would say go ahead and make that purchase. But if you're just playing racing games for fun and you already have a CSL Elite, I don't think, at least with the base model version, I don't think it's worth the extra $350, at least in the US. I don't know. I think it costs more in other parts of the world. Now, another thing that I did notice is because there wasn't any momentary loss of force feedback in traction zones and quick directional changes, I did feel more confident in online races. Now, the cars, at least in F122, the cars are a little bit more unstable than in Grand Prix mode and time trial mode. So when I was using the CSL Elite, I noticed that I couldn't push quite as hard as I did in offline modes just because of that split-second loss of force feedback. But with the direct drive wheel, in the it was like maybe 3 or so online races that I've tried with the direct drive wheel, I felt way more confident. I could push a little bit more just because the detail of the force feedback made me more confident in the car and made my laps a little bit more consistent. So it didn't make me like blazingly fast or much faster than I was before on the CSL Elite, but it did allow me to be more confident just because I could use the detail in the force feedback to push a little bit more. So that's another positive with the CSL DD, the base model version. Allowed me to be more confident, and there's no loss of force feedback in quick directional changes. And that's pretty much about it, at least with the 5 Newton meter version anyway. One interesting thing to note, I don't know why, but I noticed this with the CSL Elite as well. In the Formula 1 games, the force feedback seems to be so weak compared to the more sim race titles. If you jump into like iRacing or ACC or Assetto Corsa, I noticed that even with the base model DD, the force feedback felt so much stronger. Like it felt closer to the CSL Elite, at least at the settings that I had. So I'm not really sure why Codemasters or EA have kind of nerfed the strength of the force feedback in the F1 games, but I feel like there is more power to be extracted, and Cody's doesn't do a good job of extracting as much power as possible from the 5 Newton meter DD wheelbase for some reason. It felt a lot more powerful and a lot more detailed in the other sim racing titles. I mean, it might just be because they're actual sim titles, whereas F1 is more of an arcade title. But I feel like if those other companies that have those titles that have been around for years and years can extract more power from the wheelbase, I think Cody's should be able to do it as well. I don't know if that has anything to do with their affiliation with Fanatec and maybe conspiring to force people to buy the 8 Newton meter version for more power. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it is interesting to note that the force feedback is a lot weaker in the Codemaster titles than they are in the other sim titles on PC. Now, I don't know how this thing feels on console. I do know that consoles, because of their lack of power compared to PC, the force feedback isn't as detailed as in a PC. So the last console I used a steering wheel on was a PS4, like the base model PS4, not even a PS4 Pro, and the force feedback was terrible on that thing. So I'm not quite sure how they feel on these next gen consoles. Now we're going to go on to the actual wheelbase itself, and a couple things I noticed, some issues I had, minor issues. Now if you take a look at the DD wheelbase compared to the CSL Elite, the steering wheel is flush against the faceplate of the CSL Elite. So it's really close, but when you look at the DD, it sticks out like an extra 2.5 inches. So because of that, I had to move my seat back, which actually lowered my seat. I only have a Playseat challenge, so I couldn't move it back. I had to move it back and lower it. So now I'm in a lower seating position. So I had to adjust the chair and get used to a new sitting position. Now, it wasn't too big of a deal. I got used to it after about an hour, and I'm sure in about a week, I'm not even going to notice a difference. I do have some indigo lime stabilizers on here. And another issue with that as well, as we pan back down here, is you notice that the DD sits pretty much flat on the base platform there, whereas the CSL Elite has this little wedge that sits it up at an angle. So I used to have this base plate here tilted down a little bit to make the CSL Elite parallel to my seating position, but because the DD sits flat, I had to raise the wheelbase, meaning I had to move these support structures here, move that bracket up a little bit as well, something I wasn't really anticipating. I knew I had to make some changes because of the extra distance on the wheelbase there, but I had to spend about an hour and a half making all these changes to the Playseat challenge, and it was something that I really didn't think about before buying it. Again, not too much of an issue. I got used to it, but it was about an hour and a half of work that I had to put into the actual Playseat challenge. Now, the CSL DD and the Playseat challenge that itself didn't have any issues. Obviously, the CSL Elite has 7.5 Newton meters of force, so a CSL DD with 5 Newton meters of force isn't going to be too much of an issue with this seat. It still works fine. I'm sure the boost kit's not going to make it that much worse. I have the indigo lime support brackets underneath the Playseat challenge platform, and it still feels okay right now. Before I bought the indigo lime support system, I had just used ratchet straps, and even then it was fine. I'll put the indigo lime link in the description for those of you guys that do have a Playseat challenge or are thinking about buying a Playseat challenge to put your sim rig on, and you can check it out and see if you want to buy that to help stabilize your rig a little bit. It's definitely worth the money. I think everything like the pedal board brackets and the wheelbase platform brackets, I think everything came up to like less than $90 or something like that shipping to the US, so it's totally worth it. Just be careful, some of the screws get stripped after a while, after loosening and tightening them for 2.5 years. I had to go out and replace them at Home Depot, and paid a whopping $10 to replace all the screws and nuts, but they're definitely worth it. So conclusion, after 1 or 2 days with the CSL DD, if you already have a CSL Elite and you can't afford the 8 Newton meter version and you think maybe you want to buy the 5 Newton meter version, I don't think it's really worth it. Again, like I said, unless you're thinking about getting into esports or some more serious racing where you need to extract as much time as possible, I don't think there's enough of a difference to really justify $350 for the 5 Newton meter version. I'm assuming the 8 Newton meter boost kit is going to make it feel a lot better and probably worth your money, but then that'll be, I think, what, like $550 that you'll be paying out of pocket. If you can get rid of your CSL Elite, then I'd say go for it. I think it'll be a big improvement. Just the detail alone in the force feedback and the confidence you'll feel in traction zones and in quick directional movement areas, I think it'll make it worth it for you. But if you're just playing these games for fun, I don't think I can recommend switching over to a CSL DD. I don't think it's enough of a night and day difference to really justify all that money. But for me, I just like to play for fun and make some videos, and the timing was right with my buddy wanting to get his racing rig as well. So I think for me it was a good choice, as I didn't have to pay full price for the entire setup. But like I said, it'll be up to you. I think it does. I think the 5 Newton meter base model version still feels good. I think it's on par with the CSL Elite. Going from a CSL Elite to the base 5 Newton meter version, I think is more of a side grade than anything. The 8 Newton meter version, I'm assuming, will probably be a slight upgrade, and at the very least, it'll future-proof your racing rig for a little while, as I think the future is direct drive wheel. Actually, it definitely is direct drive wheels. I think for the most part, the belt-driven wheels are a thing of the past, and you even see companies like Thrustmaster and Logitech moving on to direct drive wheels, even though their G29 is still going for like $250 online. Why? I mean, I know it's like a complete set with the wheel and wheelbase and pedal set and everything, but it just feels like a toy compared to something like a CSL DD. But yeah, that's it for my first few days and my thoughts. Just to summarize, there's no dead zone or no loss of force feedback in areas where you're making quick directional changes, or losing traction from understeer and then gaining understeer. All of a sudden, you don't get that the belt kind of dying. I think the manufacturers do that just so the belts and the gears last a little bit longer. Obviously, quick directional changes with high force feedback settings would obviously damage those a lot quicker than if they hadn't implemented the momentary loss of power to allow the gear a second to come to a stop before going back in the other direction. So I can understand why they've done that, but obviously the direct drive wheels are much better in that case study. Also, it allows for you to be a lot more confident in online races. I know I've only done a couple of online races, but I can already feel with the base model DD, I feel way more confident in online races, and it allows me to push a little bit more. And then just finally, it'll future-proof your rig, I think. You can always upgrade to 8 Newton meters later on if you're just thinking about the 5 Newton meter version now, and it'll be an improvement over the CSL Elite. Now, I think the CSL Elites usually last for a really long time anyway. I've had mine for 2.5 years and haven't had any issues whatsoever. Not a single issue with the CSL Elite. In fact, my Formula V2 steering wheel has more issues. One of my buttons is kind of dying on me. I have to like jam it like 20 times before it registers. So I had to switch that over to another button because I was using it for overtake, and now it's not reliable enough. And then one of my shifters on the APM module is starting to go as well. So the wheelbase itself seems to last a lot longer than a lot of the other accessories like the steering wheel. So yeah, if you can get rid of your Elite and not pay full price for the CSL DD, I say go for it. But if you're not going into esports or any serious racing and you're just kind of curious about the direct drive, I don't know if I would recommend making that switch over. The CSL Elite's still good enough for whatever you're using it for, especially if you're not playing like the F1 games where you're needing to make quick directional changes. If you're going to be playing like a Assetto Corsa Competizione and you know, those cars obviously don't go quite as fast, and you're not having to crank the steering wheel quite as fast as you do in the F1 games, then I think the CSL Elite is more than enough for you. Now, like I said, I do have the boost kit coming in a day or two. I will try that out as well, and then I will let you know how that goes. For the Playseat Challenge, if you're looking to pair the CSL DD with the Playseat Challenge, I think it'll definitely work out for you. It's totally fine for me. I don't have any issues. I'll put the link to the Indigo Lime website in the description for those of you guys that want to take a look at that. I think it's a really good investment to help stabilize your rig a little bit. So yeah, that's it for me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed and hope you found it a little bit informational. Let me know what you think. If you have earned it, please feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. Stay tuned for more. Remember to eat your bok choy. I'll see you guys in the next one.